This week on Gaming the Podcast, we are talking about Katherine, the 2011 offering from Atlus, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary this week. Now, the creators of Katherine describe it as an unconventional romantic horror. Others simply call it a puzzle game, and others yet call it a dating sim. In reality, it is all of these things and more, and we're going to be talking about what makes it so great and just how it has stood the test of time. I am John Robertson, and I will be joined by Stace Harman. Together we are Indie by Design, and we create books that celebrate the history, culture and art of video games, and we also work as design and narrative and product consultants across a wide range of games and with a wide range of studios. You can follow us on Twitter, we are at Indie by Design, and you can check out our website, indiebydesign.net. So that's the blurb out of the way, and let's get on with Katherine.
Katherine is 10 years old this week, and something that has struck me recently when thinking about it is that for a game that is titled Katherine, it's not really about anybody called Katherine at all. It's about something, I think, much bigger than that, lots of different themes that are much bigger than that, and I'm interested as somebody that's completed it several times over the years since its 2011 debut. Have you taken different things from it each time you've played it, and kind of what's been your read on the notion of the kind of the central themes, and have they changed in importance for you over the many times that you've played it?
Well, I first played it 10 years ago when I was obviously 10 years younger, so I'm not sure what my take on it was then. I think if anything, I remember just being absolutely just in love with the game, that it was just so ballsy, that it was about like sex and relationships and cheating, and there's these really like, you know, alluring girls in it, and the game's not afraid to just sort of like dive into that head first and just like be about that, which on the surface of it is, at least. And I think that's quite unusual for a serious game, I suppose, like I hate to say proper game, but you know, I'm talking about games that are not just sex fests for, you know.
Yeah, it had aspirations to be beyond a niche title, for sure. Like, I think Atlus never intended it to be like, oh, we'll put this out and it will only sell a few thousand copies, but that's okay because we've got something to say. I think it clearly had aspirations to be bigger than that. And so, yeah, it's refreshing to see themes like that aren't sidelined or aren't, like, the game's not embarrassed about that. It's no. It's not trying to be apologetic for it. So that's
and it treats those themes in a mature way as well. Like, yes, Vincent, the main character, and there's going to be spoilers all over the place for the game, but
for a 10-year-old
Vincent,
game,
the main character, yes, has sex with people. He cheats on his long-term partner. All of this stuff, but the game is not like it's not sexualized just for the point of it. Like, it's everything is in there for a reason. Everything is in there to kind of tie into the game's bigger themes and questions, and I think the questions is where the game really stands out, and why the game is important, and why the game is genuinely more mature than the vast majority of other games, in that the game asks you questions and forces you to, or asks you, at least, doesn't force you, it asks you to internalize those questions and have a reading on them, and then kind of project that back at the game. Whereas most games, I would argue, are about actions and reactions. So it's like, here's a scenario, how do you react to it? How do you perform actions in this game, whether it's Street Fighter beating someone up, or Call of Duty shooting someone, or FIFA scoring a goal, or whatever. This isn't really about that. And so this isn't really about you imposing yourself on the game and showing dominance over it. It's about having the game ask you questions, and then your reactions to that are projected back onto the game in a way that makes you see the events differently from other players. Even if you're seeing, I would argue, even if you're seeing the same events as other players, and there's different pathways that Katherine can go down, but even if you're seeing the same events as other players in the game, you'll have a different reaction and a different response to them, because you're being forced to internalize the questions that the game is asking you about, well, ultimately about freedom versus order. Do you want a life that's completely free, or do you want one that's ordered? So that's what the game is kind of really about, and it says as much at the end, so I'm not trying to claim some great philosophical insight, but yeah, so that's what, and freedom and order will mean different things to different people, and it might be positive for some people, negative for other people. Like order in this case is Catherine with a K, Catherine McBride, represented by her marriage and having a child, and that's order. That's an ordered life moving forward in the games, in the games terminology. Whereas freedom is represented by Catherine with a C. You know, the sexual object, I guess.
The literal succubus. A demon who exists purely for titillation and temptation. I mean, there's no. Again, there's no. That's not a reading into it. That is literally what she is. So that's spoiler.
So and I don't think there are that many games like that, really. That many games that ask you. I think there are other games, like Shadow of the Colossus immediately comes to mind. That's also a game about actions, but it's also a game about questions. It forces you to question what you're doing and then project it back onto the world, but in a very different way to this. So it is in a different way to this, I think. And Shadow of the Colossus is, we should do an episode on that. That is its own thing. I think there is a kind of a almost a gotcha at the end of Shadow of the Colossus that you, if you haven't already got there yourself through implicit means, it is quite explicit in its judgment of your actions and what you're attempting to do. Catherine, though, I think it is also ripe, because of the way that it's written and performed, I think it's also ripe for roleplay, that you don't have to internalise those questions at all. You can internalise them insofar as, I think Vincent would do this, or I think Vincent should do this, or by proxy, I'm going to live out this exciting life and have Vincent do X, Y, and Z. But and whilst I would agree, I mean, I absolutely internalised those questions and imprinted myself on the game in the way that I answered them. You don't have to, and I don't think it, and in some cases it doesn't matter what you do, because you're going to go down a certain path regardless. It's just whether you do that kind of willingly or begrudgingly, except for the point where you have the questions at the end of the nightmare stages where you're sat in a confessional booth. It's very pointed and on the nose. You're sat in a confessional booth and you are asked a very pointed question, and there you are forced to choose. There is no but I meant this or I meant that. It's, you have to choose one or the other. And that is another instance of kind of the freedom and order, that you have no freedom in that question. You can't say, oh, I'm not sure, get back to me on that, or I'll have a think about it. You have to say I think almost unequivocally, two diametrically opposed answers. You have to say either, yes, I agree with this, or no, I don't, or one of the early ones is, does life begin or end with marriage? And there is no well, wait a minute, it's neither. That's crazy. What's that? Why are we talking about marriage when there are other things to talk about? That's the question, and you have to answer it. And if you don't, you will sit there in that confessional booth forever, which is its own sort of pointed examination of indecision and youth, which I think is interesting in itself. I absolutely internalised those questions, I think, like you did. But I like that it's well done. Vincent isn't a blank slate. He's not a cipher who just exists for you to pour yourself into. He is his own person, and the fact that you can then roleplay, I think, is interesting and refreshing, and takes some of the pressure off, because you're allowed to, if you like. The game gives you implicit permission to roleplay however you want, based on your reading of Vincent and what you think's best for him. Those questions are interesting, because
the explicit ones in the confessional.
Because they're so if the game is about freedom or order, do you want a free life or do you want an ordered one? Those questions are I think the majority of those questions in there say, does life begin or end with marriage? To most people, I think that if they're being honest with themselves, most people would say, well, I don't know, to be honest. If you're presumably asking someone who, if they haven't got married, then how would they have the experience to know, really? Of course, it's just what their intuition would say. But I think most people, to most of those questions in the confessional booth, would answer, I don't know, I'm not sure.
Somewhere
it depends. It depends where I'm at in life. As I age, it will be a different answer. And that would be the honest approach. And I think the answers for my honest answer to most of the questions in the game would be somewhere in the middle, or just simply I don't know. But the game doesn't allow you to say I don't know. You have to choose one or the other, and I think that's that's surely a commentary on the idea that Vincent has to choose between an ordered life or a free life, and it's like society or a life of freedom. I hate to use free as sort of like diametrically opposed to order, because it doesn't necessarily mean that, but
it's like law and chaos as well. Like there's substitutes for the same. It's like law and chaos in something like D&D. Like it's freedom and order is like chaos and law respectively. And it's whichever words you feel kind of, I guess, that you most relate to or least react negatively to, because it's not a judgment. There's no implicit judgment in those terms. It's just concepts.
Yeah, but I think the game forcing you to answer, say on the marriage question, does life begin or end in marriage? It forces you to choose one of those, and I think that's supposed to, or that can be read as the game symbolizing society or your friendship groups or your partner or whoever else, anyone that's kind of involved in your life, either on a societal sort of mega high level, even like the government, versus, you're someone much more intimate and close, like your partner. That's the game kind of taking the role of the person who's demanding an answer from you, and people and society, government doesn't like the idea of ambiguity. It won't like you saying, well, do you want this or do you want that, and you saying I have no idea, I don't know. Like, that's not a satisfying answer for people or the state or the society that you live in or the culture that you live in. They want an answer from you, like, what kind of person are you, like, what do you believe in, what are you aiming for, what are your goals, like, what's your career going to like, everything, all of this stuff. You have to have an answer to that, otherwise you're some sort of like aimless soul, like doing nothing. And I think that's what do you mean
represents. You don't know? What do you mean you haven't decided? Like, there's definitely, that's not an uncommon thing to hear or to imagine hearing in anybody's life about, marriage, kids, jobs, traveling, whatever it is. So So I guess as much as the game is about asking questions, it, I guess, is also a statement on the fact that we must have an answer to all questions that are asked of us, and it's seen as like a weakness or aimless not to have an answer. But we must give an answer, even if we don't have one. Like that, perhaps more for me, more specifically. Even if you don't know, even if your honest answer is, well, I haven't decided, I don't know, I'm not sure. It doesn't matter. You have to at least you have to have the appearance of an answer, an appearance of having thought this through, and say one way or the other. Because otherwise, ambiguity is not tolerated, is not celebrated.
So I think in terms, when it comes to like what makes it great, what makes it memorable, what makes it important, it's the way that it asks questions of you, and then it also reflects back this idea that you've got, in society's eyes, in the eyes of your friends and family or whatever, you've got a responsibility to always give answers to every question. And I suppose on a state level, a culture or a society level, whatever culture you grew up in. Of course, Catherine is a Japanese game, so it's sort of entrenched in Japanese kind of fears and societal norms, and positively and negatively. At the end of the game, or towards the end of the game, Boss, a character, the sort of owner of the stray sheep bar that you spend a lot of time in, reveals that he is there to pull non-committal men away from committed women, like, so pull Vincent away from Catherine McBride,
leading sheep away,
pull him away from her, because he's not committed enough to have kids and settle down and be married, and they use Catherine with a C, the succubus Catherine, in order to pull him away so that a new man can be with Catherine with a K. I wish they weren't called Catherine, both of them. But Catherine McBride,
it gets even worse than that in Full Bodied with another Catherine with a Q.
Catherine with a Q. And then they put so that then a more committed man can be with Catherine McBride and perform those tasks of raising a kid and being committed to the marriage, which is especially pertinent in Japan given its low birth rate, its aging population, the idea that you have fewer and fewer committed relationships is a real problem for Japanese society. So it's culturally sensitive to to, well, it's projecting that cultural issue that the nation in which it was made is going through.
But it's framed in such a way that irrespective of your reading or understanding of that, you can still relate to it in some way, shape or form. There's enough characters in it that, even amongst Vincent's friends, that you will find common ground with some of them or all of them at any given time. And that can change. They're not just like these one-dimensional things that all exist for one purpose. They each have something more to say than their kind of descriptor, their character. Like Orlando is the divorced one, but that doesn't mean he always takes a negative view of marriage, or like there is other things that he might say throughout the game that mean that it just makes you think about it, and I guess in the way that real conversations happen, it's like, somebody you think is diametrically opposed to you can say something that makes you think, actually, wait a minute, that kind of either chimes with what I think, or that makes me think of certain things in a different way. And so even outside of that, we can look at it, from a Western perspective and see ourselves in some of that, see ourselves in those conversations about relationships. And I think it's interesting that was the framing that was settled upon, because originally it's been said in interviews that one of the original directions for Catherine was actually a war setting in which soldiers all shared this same restless sleep in between skirmishes. And so it would be like you're in the trenches and everybody goes to sleep and they have this shared experience, and then they wake and there's a battle going on, which would have its own thematic interesting avenues to explore, obviously. And the notion of conflict is still very much at the fore of that. But it's interesting that it was framed in this much more, I guess, relatable for most of us and down to earth setting of like, well, there's some friends, there's a bar, there's some pizza, like, have at it. It's much easier to jump into. And I like that about it, because, games can take you to a lot of places and do take you to a lot of places, other planets, and you can be other species and this, that, and the other, but you can also occasionally just hang out in a bar with your friends. And there's not a lot of games that I think allow you to do that.
It's interesting. I didn't know about that war setting, but I'm glad that they went with the bar. The bar in Vincent's apartment, basically the only settings, the only locations in the whole game, and the nightmares, of course. But yeah, it does make it feel relatable, and I like Vincent. Like he's a bit of like a calamitous character, but he's like, it's easy to have compassion for him. Like even if you haven't directly experienced what he's going through, like you can still feel empathy for him. You can still feel compassionate towards him and how he tries to just navigate what is a pretty impossible situation, really. Like it's impossible not to mess up in some way in the situation he's in. Like there's no perfect outcome for him. His friends as well. I was just thinking, like, because of the three friends at the table, so there's Toby, Johnny and Orlando, two of them, Johnny and Orlando, also eventually appear in Vincent's nightmares as sheep. Tobias, Toby doesn't, but I think that's a comment on Tobias being so young that he's not forced into this kind of, the blocks of life don't have to be balanced and moved around for him yet. He can still he doesn't have to worry about that just now. But I'm wondering if the fact that only at the very end of the game do you have confirmation that Orlando and Johnny are also in those dreams, even though that they are, as a player, that they are because of what they're wearing, what the sheep are wearing. They're wearing Johnny's jacket and Orlando's jacket and hat. But Vincent, the character, doesn't know that, and they don't admit it to each other. Only at the very end they admit it. And I wonder if that's a commentary on men being bad at sharing their deepest feelings with each other, even though they're all going through this terrible thing, but they don't know that they're all sharing this terrible thing because they won't talk about it with each other. Although Vincent does say that he's going through it, or it's Johnny and Orlando that don't reveal it until the end. Vincent is actually quite open about it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, there's definitely reflections in real life at the moment, I think, with what we're all living through, and how much of that we'll talk about or don't talk about, and whether retrospectively we'll talk about it more, particularly men will talk about it more, whether they'll talk about how they struggled with, lockdown and enforced isolation and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think there is a lot of, clearly there's a lot of themes, there's a lot of things to discuss, there's a lot of reasons that Catherine is great, on a philosophical level, and also from a structural point of view, the way that it balances the day-night cycle, as it is effectively the nightmare and waking hours cycle, and how it sets those two things up against each other, and how Vincent is very upwardly mobile, quite literally, in the nightmare stages, which he's completely not in these waking in these waking hours. He moves around quite lethargically, and particularly the drunker you get, he just kind of staggers around without any particular direction. But along with all of that is the fact that the game looks and sounds awesome on a very, at its most visually and orally. It is arresting in, like, straight from the off, right from the credits. It's like, well, this is incredibly stylish and incredibly, this is not something I've seen in too many other places. And it maintains that. I think it's like, even when it's using classical music throughout the nightmare stages, it's putting its own spin on it, and it maintains that kind of, that feel, that like it's a place that I want to spend time. The Stray Sheep Bar is just like one of my favorite game spaces, I think, and for sure. There's definitely like the freedom and order, or law and chaos themes reflected in the bar as well. But yeah, I mean, it just looks and sounds awesome, and I think there's, I don't know, like I've certainly spent a few late nights in the Stray Sheep having a drink in real life whilst playing Catherine, and Vincent's having a drink, put some music on the jukebox.
Meta at a whole new level.
It's like, it surprises me how much the ice chinking in Vincent's Cuba Libre makes me want a rum and coke of my own. And yeah, just hanging out and kind of enjoying that space and putting music on the jukebox, playing the arcade machine. It's just, there aren't a lot of game spaces. There's a hub areas, I guess, but there aren't a lot of game spaces that are an actual part of the game where, you're also meant to be doing other stuff, getting involved in other people's lives if you want to.
Yeah, it's super welcoming.
That accomplished.
Yeah. And it does feel like, the people there are welcoming and friendly, which is obviously at odds with many of the sort of experience you see in the nightmare area. But yeah, the look and feel, like it's a PS3 game, and obviously like Full Body is remastered and whatever for PS4, but it's the form of visuals, isn't it? Like it focuses on style and art direction over just technical considerations. Like it's not about how many pixels have we got here, and like how complicated is the texture and the geometry. Like it's about style. Like this is, it's anime style. It's a style that they use in Persona, like, and it just, both games look amazing, amazing for it. And the Stray Sheep as well. Like there's the super obvious elements that kind of reflect what you're doing, like the fact that it's called the Stray Sheep, for one, the fact that there's the Rapunzel puzzle in the corner that you can play, the jazz music that's playing, or the fact that it's a jazz bar, and then Rin in Full Body is playing like jazz piano, and jazz being a more kind of, an expression of freedom of expression through the typically ordered form of music, I guess. So that's the choice of jazz there is not an accident. Like that's a well-timed, a well-considered addition, like a sort of window dressing aesthetic consideration just sort of layered over the top that just works, and it just highlights that the level of detail in the game. Like there's no accidents here. Like everything is in there, and I think that's one of the reasons why it kind of benefits from repeat playthroughs as well, because whilst you know what's coming, and there is a strong element of repetition in both the puzzles and the Stray Sheep stuff, there's just so rich with just those finer details. Those finer details are there to be like pulled on and picked up on even differently each time.
I think, isn't that also commented on, I think in the update, in the full-bodied update, isn't that commented on that Rin is like, her piano playing is somewhat discordant, I suppose.
She starts off
polite way of
terrible.
saying
She
it.
gets better at the end.
But other people still comment on. I think somebody I think comments on the fact that they quite like it, and it's like that is reflective of, you know, particularly perhaps something like jazz, where it's one person's kind of cacophony of noise is another person's like just chilled out vibe, like it, and that is a nice, you know, balancing reflection as well in that it's not about what is good and bad or what is better than or worse than. It's just like what choices are you making and how are you navigating them, and ultimately, are you happy? Are you doing the things that are making you happy? And yeah, the fact that you can go and play the Rapunzel arcade machine and impose that order. That's a very ordered, self-contained element of the game. But even that then feeds back into, you know, you get better at Rapunzel as you get better at the nightmare stages, and vice versa, because you it's not necessarily about learning new tricks, but you start viewing the puzzles in a certain way, and you kind of get, it's like that thing of once you get your head around it, or once you see it, it becomes easier. Because I think it's fair to say Catherine is considered to be the puzzles are considered to be quite difficult, right? Like it's considered to be quite a difficult game.
I find them quite hard. Yeah.
And it's that thing I think of, and also like exposure and, you know, familiarity. The more time you spend with it, the better you get at it. And if you go away for a long time and come back, you completely forget some of the techniques and how it is that you're meant to ascend. There's definitely those, you know, those balancing notes on each end. So you played it most recently, well, very recently, right? You replayed it
a few days
over
ago.
the weekend. So when you've been back to, do you find yourself focusing? Are you focusing on different things? Are you focusing on like the experiential of just being, you know, just hanging out, just like enjoying the daytime stuff or the bar stuff at least, or are you more focused on like the challenge of the puzzles? Like what's been the thing that's been appealing to you most?
I've been focusing more on the outside of the puzzle stuff. So this time around, given that this is I think the third time I've played it all the way through, I just put the puzzles on easy and just tore through them. And you can actually just press L1, I think, and Vincent will just go up for you, so you don't even have to do it. You just watch him. But yeah,
which I don't think existed in the original, right? Like that's a new addition. I think that's a new addition to the full-bodied version, that you can just have him effectively auto-complete, which I think is as a result of feedback and like just understanding how people play the game. And some people aren't interested in the puzzle bit; they just want the story bit. So that's, you know, that notion of like responding to how people play and then reflecting that in as an option in an updated version of the game, I think is, you know, that shows attention to detail. It's not just like, oh, let's rehash this thing that was popular 10 years ago. That's a real value added element. Yeah.
But I think the thing that just always strikes me is like the gamey bit of the game, the puzzles, and the more kind of the thematic side of the game, like the bar and the cutscenes. They tie into each other so well. So like there's the obvious stuff of, you know, in the puzzles he's forever climbing upwards in life, like sort of again, society and expectation is that you'll climb upwards, you'll move up the career ladder, you'll move forwards in your life, you'll do these things like, you know, up and forwards are always kind of like the labels put on things that you should be doing. And he's trying to work that out. He's going up through the blocks, he's moving up the steps of life, he's trying to balance the blocks as he goes. It's confusing. Trial and error is a thing that the game was called out on a lot when it first came out, and the puzzles being too much about trial and error. But then whilst is that fun or not is one question, but it is reflective of the idea that in life we are just fumbling around, and like there's no manual for life that is going to get you through your specific problems properly. There will be an element of trial and error and just kind of hoping for the best and just experimenting and seeing if it worked. Okay, it doesn't work. And I mean, luckily in Catherine, you get the chance to rewind time and go back turns. You don't get that in real life. But I think the block puzzles do kind of represent that. And then there's obviously the factor of time as well. So the more time you spend on the puzzles, the the more the blocks will fall away from you and you'll eventually die, which obviously reflects our real life, that you can't, when you're faced with a problem, when you're faced with a choice, you can't just wait around for a year, 2 years and decide what to do. Like, you have to make a choice now, because otherwise everything's going to mess up, or the decision's going to be harder the longer you leave them. And that's reflected in those puzzles. I also read that, so the game got some criticism for there being a dissonance between how Vincent acts at the bar and how he acts in his nightmares. So at the bar, he's very kind of sheepish and unsure and fearful, whereas in the nightmares he's very reassuring to the other people. He's cocky, even, like he like taunts the creatures chasing him and whatever, and he's very self-confident. So he's the opposite in his dreams than he is in real life. But
isn't that so often the case? I mean,
well, yeah, exactly. Like, that's how I read that. Like, there's like, that's exactly what that's surely what the game is saying. That here, when it's just you and you're in control of your own dreams, you're in control of his own nightmares, which he refers to all the time. Like, if it's me and I'm the one conjuring this up in my mind, then surely I can be, confident in control of that. Versus when. And the gaze is only his own gaze on himself. But when the gaze is from society or from his friends or from his loved ones on him, he crumbles. And he's like, oh my God, I can't do it. So this cocky dreamer is sort of rendered hopeless when things get real and he has to actually act on these dreams. Like, we've all had like whatever it is, and so you imagine yourself just dominating the situation, and you go, and then it just doesn't work out like that. It's just absolute embarrassment.
And even just in day, absolutely, even just like during the day, you can think about it, you can daydream about it. You don't even need to be asleep for that. It's like, oh, I envisage this thing happening like this. This is the best situation. I'm absolutely gonna go up and ace that exam, or I'm gonna go up and ace this public speaking, or I'm gonna go and speak to my boss about something, or I'm going to talk to my loved ones and be decisive, and all of this. And then you do it, and it doesn't necessarily always turn out like that, often because there's some other input being chucked into that situation, which in your imagining of it there isn't. You get to speak at your own pace, and in the dream section, that is the fact that you can rewind time shows that kind of complete mastery over something. And it's and I think it's so important that there is that time element to the nightmare stages, because if it was just entirely a logic based puzzle where it's just given enough time you'll be able to work this out, it wouldn't of course have the same urgency, which then wouldn't reflect back on those, in the same way that, like you said, you don't always get to stand around and just kind of hope that an answer is going to present itself. You have to push things, pull things, prod things, and hopefully you'll work it out. And maybe you'll go on a run where, you pull a couple of things, you push a couple of things into place, and then you get to go on this run of this, what looks like a golden streak of like tearing up the mountain, as it were.
And that should happen just
by tools. It's like that. You use the tools you've got, and sometimes there's unintended consequences, both good and bad.
Well, sometimes those runs that you go on, or those solutions that you come across, could just be absolutely sheer luck. Like, that happens. But again, that happens in life. Like, it's not like the best things, if we're honest with ourselves, like, not all of the best things that happen to us are by design. Like, it's just luck, or it's by someone else's design or something.
Or you've positioned yourself in a place where that does happen. that's making your own luck. Is that that notion of like, well, I didn't know this would be the consequence or the outcome, but I have positioned myself to be in a place where I can take advantage of things that do happen. So, well, so as I said, it's like it's for a game that's called Catherine. It's not really about Catherine, is it? It's about much more than that, which has got to be part of what makes it great. That's got to be what feeds into the whole thing. Certainly for you and I, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, well, and I think that's its enduring strength as well. I guess just as like a final thought, like, that's his enduring strength, the fact that because it's about questions, those questions can change as the player changes. So the questions, how you answer those questions, how you perceive and kind of consume those questions might be different 10 years ago to they are today, and they might be different in 10 years from now. So, I mean, for that reason alone, it's a game that's worth, no, not regular, maybe not every year, but like, you know, every now and again going back to and just kind of, yeah, just having those questions thrown at you again. And I don't think there's many games like that, really.
No. Well, thanks, Jerry Springer, for that final thought there.
So, what did you think of Catherine? Do you have opinions that are different to ours? Come and let us know. We are at Indie by Design on Twitter, and we are also at Indie by Design on all other social media platforms. Via our Twitter, you'll also find a link to our Discord, which we'd love you to join so we can talk about Catherine and any other game in real time. Also, don't forget to check out our website, indiebydesign.net, where you'll find links to the books on video games that we've written. We're currently running pre-orders on 20 Double Fine Years, which is our big book of all things Double Fine, from Psychonauts 1 and 2 to Brutal Legend and Broken Age, to Grim Fandango, Day of the Tentacle and Full Throttle Remastered. Again, that's indiebydesign.net. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you again next week.